Title: DCC Campaign Update. Date: January 13th, 2014. In last night's adventure, which was apparently so good I crashed early and thus am writing this blog entry a day late, the players had quite a bit of fun, consisting in failing to sell your pop-singing hypnotoad, having to avoid the hellhounds of a sorceress ex-wife, engaging in the most hilarious bizarre haggling scene ever, being shot at by snipers after their halfling decided to stop for tea and backgammon rather than sounding the alarm, dying due to being mistaken for the wrong halfling, being kidnapped by two Spaniards, mistakenly thinking you're naked in front of a gang leader, being cursed by the snake witch, hearing increasingly perturbing rumors about the mad wizard Nicodemus, entering into a room with too many fishmen, meeting a suspiciously friendly ghost, facing a horde of skeleton ballerinas, going one thermite grenade too far, finding the room with the most important ring in the world, and then burying it under a ton of rubble, flattering Queen Boo Boo to avoid being eaten by her army of feral halfling punks, winning the favor of the second most powerful person in the entire city, meaning that the most powerful person in the entire city and all his minions will now be trying to kill you, trying to convert the world's most infamous alcoholic to the true faith, in a desperate bid to avoid getting 23 stab wounds in the back. That is all for today. RPG Pundit. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Date: January 21st, 2014. DCC Update. In the last adventure on Sunday, the PCs learned that a drunk thief shooting a hand crossbow from under a table can only almost kill an ogre, that being the chosen one of the Daemon Lord of Death is not a good deal, that blinded barons named von Kraut tend to hold grudges, that there are hardly any real clerics in Arkham. On a related note, that a cleric's life is full of disappointments and misery, that a cursed singing toad can be worth something, if you can find the right buyers, that even cultists of Bobugbubil's can't agree on how to pronounce his name, that, on the other hand, cultists of Bobugbubil's are easier to negotiate with than death cultists or vengeful barons, that there is a very, very slow long-term plan afoot to sink the city of Arkham into a swamp, that the gender of the Lord of Dragons is a subject somewhat up to debate, that someone somewhere considered halfling cannibalism a worthy subject of a work of art, that halflings that consider erotic human lithographs worth keeping are considered perverts, that you can't fool the Goblin Guard all of the time, but you can fool them some of the time, that the desert holds an army of the dead waiting to be raised, that not today really is the best thing to say to the Lord of Death. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Jellyfishman. Date: February 18th, 2014. DCC Campaign Update. In our last adventure, the PCs discovered that dark elves look totally dark, but the effect is ruined by their squeaky little voices. That the Assassin King and the Assassin's Guild have a more complicated relationship than their names would suggest. That if a Frenchman's first words to you are non, je ne suis pas un robot, he's a robot. That the temple of the love goddess Tisha is not going to be as fun a time as it sounds. That in the desert of devastation, creatures like to attack on the second watch of the night. That camel racing is a very profitable profession and respectable in certain circles. That the kraken shark is not the scariest thing in the sea of sighs. That the king of Elfland really, really has the universe's most awesome aquarium. That it's a very bad idea to offer up the dragon that's currently saving your ass as a gift to the king of Elfland. That the jellyfishmen of the deep have very good manners and a hat obsession. That the Assassin's Guild is not a community college. That the Assassin King will go to obscene lengths to adequately nuke his pizza pockets. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Date: February 25th, 2014. In this weekend's DCC campaign adventure, it was shockingly confirmed that the Assassin's Guild are definitely not a community college. The Assassin's Guild are, however, the proprietors of the worst-kept secret hideout in all of Arkham. The Assassin's Guild are also mediocre quality leatherworkers. The dwarves definitely know how to hold a grudge. They also know how to air grievances, file complaints, list lamentations, and take 2 or 3 days to answer simple questions. The dwarves are also absolute masters of defensive fighting, which might explain why they lost their ancient homelands. The Snake Witch does not like having her rumpy-bumpy interrupted with requests for snack breaks. The Snake Witch is also an advocate for slow and very painful capital punishment. Trying to charm one of the Snake Witch's public employees is a very dangerous idea, but may just get you somewhere. The Desert Nomad's camel milk wine is very potent stuff, and may have you waking up next to two burly nomads, a midget, a dancing bear, three whirling dervishes, a tapestry illustrator, and a particular smarmy alcoholic chaos lord. Putting nitroglycerine in a flask does nothing to improve its carrying safety. The desert of destruction is not nearly as dangerous as it sounds. The plain of glass is also not nearly as dangerous as it sounds. The valley of garbage is much, much more dangerous than it sounds. There are good slimes and bad slimes, and ways to differentiate between the two. Mutagenic goo slime and bleach do not mix. It is strategically unwise to attack your opponents from the higher ground of a hill of soiled diapers. Large diaper-related explosions only attract more bugbears. Bugbears in the world of the last sun are literally crosses between bugs and bears. Low-intellect chaos swords mostly just keep trying to get you to steal stuff. Blasters do nothing against gelatinous cube slimes. Phasers, on the other hand, are fairly effective. Magic missiles still work best. The crystal of the tyrant did not actually belong to the tyrant. It was meant to keep the tyrant imprisoned. Dwarves built their machines big, and built them to last. Their warning messages, not so much. When surrounded by hundreds of eye-tyrants and their king, the only chance you really have is to make them laugh. Never trust an elf in desperate search of a potion of intelligence. An ancient dwarven particle beam cannon can slice a dragon in two. The Snake Witch rarely forgives, and she never forgets, so you had better. Finally, in 2014, 10-year-old boys are surprisingly nonchalant about a magic missile. Spell turning them into a girl every time they cast it, as long as it does a lot of damage. Title: DCC Campaign Update Date, March 11th, 2014. The last adventure was a bit shorter than usual, as our youngest gamer was starting his school year the next morning. But anyways, here are, very briefly, the things we learned, with varying degrees of surprise or the lack thereof, that astrology based on following the path of the floating islands in the sky is about as unreliable as most other methods of fortune-telling. Some halflings have a vested interest in being nicknamed Binky. Indoor plumbing is one sophisticated comfort of living in Arkham, or would be if it wasn't for the tentacles in the sink. The Halcyon Lords appear to be planning to become the next major power in Arkham on the basis of graffiti alone. Evil nightingales are total assholes. Nobles who post rewards for the rescue of their kidnapped child get flooded with annoying treasure seekers. Bourgeois secretaries have little patience with absurd claims of allegedly psychic halflings. The Halcyon Lords appear to actually be planning to become the next major power in Arkham on the basis of kidnapping the children of the aristocracy. Never split up the party is apparently an ancient axiom, but one that this particular group of PCs has decided is just superstition. Most locally produced meat products, milk and ink in Arkham, comes from the giant snail farms of the Tower of Snails. Never split up the party even further to include various groups of one is not actually an axiom, but if it was, this particular PC group would shit all over that one too. While most young gender-fluid third-level wizards would consider it suicide to go into a dungeon totally by themselves, apparently at least one does not. The Halcyon Lords are in fact planning to become the next major power in Arkham by assaulting the turf of the feral halfling tribe-gang. Queen Boo Boo does not look kindly on this, and halflings everywhere going apeshit with paranoia, slathering a tied-up halfling in honey and threatening to unleash a half-starved dog at him is probably an effective way to get him to talk, but charm person might be easier. While most young gender-fluid third-level wizards would probably die horribly at the hands of a giant toad gator, 14 brain-eaten slaves, and a vicious brain-eaten axe-wielding maniac, apparently at least one will end up miraculously kicking all their asses instead. Aside from everything else, the Halcyon Lords apparently also plan on becoming the next major power in Arkham by being incredibly well-dressed, total badass fighter assassins with scary Halcyon masks. That evil nightingale really is a complete asshole. Title: DCC Campaign Update Date, March 25, 2014. In this weekend's exciting second-parter to the previous adventure, it was revealed that being a snail feeder is one of the least rewarding jobs possible, to the point that if any drunken maniac asks you if you want to be an adventurer, you'll jump at the chance. Taking a shower or using a toilet on Arcombe can sometimes be a deadly proposition. Tentacular horrors are no match for the ethereal armies of Elfland. The halfling definition of do the right thing is betray your trusted ally at the first sign of weakness. Giant crocotoads are a tastier raw flesh dish for feral halflings than tentacular monstrosity, but neither hold a candle to delicious human flesh. The torture chamber staff of the Assassin King is surprisingly inclusive of gender and sexual preference. Also, his secretarial pool is beyond reproach. The Hulken Lords are extremely good at planning coup d'etat. Gang wars in Arcombe very quickly get out of hand. On the other hand, Hulken Lords are not that keen on the sanity department. The Tower of Corpses is just a name. It's actually a decent enough place. Hulken Lords are excellent, however, at cryptic esoteric statements that make no sense, but have an air of significance. Clerics in Arcombe, or in general for that matter, have a hard life. But once in a while being able to download the wrath of God makes it all worthwhile. Hulken Lords have seen the riband, and think soon you will too, and then take up the Hulken mask. Duke Halcon is a take-charge kind of homicidal maniac. So is his second-in-command, the Thrush. Ogres make surprisingly good wizards, by ogre standards. Dropping a tub full of man-fat into a sword fight doesn't necessarily make anything better, but it does make things a hell of a lot funnier. Some second-parters end up being three-parters. Title: DCC Campaign Update Date: April 9th, 2014. This weekend we finally finished the third part of the Adventure at Hand. We got a couple of new 1ST level characters from new players in our group, namely an ex-professional torturess turned mercenary warrior woman and an ex-astrologer turned wizard in an already wizard-heavy party. The party learned the first rule of not getting bored is don't split up the party. The second rule is don't hang out with 4 times more NPCs than you have players. Charm person quickly creates little megalomaniacs. Said little megalomaniacs can get away with it, at least for a good long while, if they also have some serious magic missile power. Some elves just really want to summon a bear. When you're hanging out with a bunch of hired mercenaries and a bunch of loyal guild assassins, sometimes the best answer is to just let them kill each other. A dude with a hoe can occasionally end up surviving to become a hero. But if his name is Olaf, he's also doomed to be called Holaf for the rest of his career. Ogre wizards have an excessive love of color spray. In Arcombe, wealthy parents tell their young children to behave or the halflings will come to eat them. Sometimes the best strategy is to just hide out in a barn full of giant snails until the heat is off. Sometimes the best plan is to just sell back the old family's children at a bargain price. It's not a good idea to start shooting at a non-belligerent imp when you're surrounded by dozens of mafiosi. Imps are tough to assassinate. Once in a while, when a gang tries a move to take over the entire city of Arcombe, it may possibly work, but more likely the result will be that instead of 2 gangs squabbling for control over the city, you end up with 6. Just because you've been guilloted to be unable to talk about the eye tyrants doesn't mean they aren't on their way. The Snake Witch is alive. Title: DCC Campaign Update Date: April 22nd, 2014. In today's surreal adventure, the player characters were confronted by highly confused 0-level characters. A curiosity shop that actually had useful things, like curious wands that leave you wondering what they do. One of those useful things actually being a plexiglass screen that could be fitted into the modified back of a Pythian battle armor to accommodate extra mutant eyes. Angry old family would-be kidnappers. Crazy leper Jim, a guy begging for magic items for the poor, might turn out to be a useful hireling with 7 years of interpretive dance training. Rumors of mad wizards turning halflings into goats, with halfling faces. Confirmation of said rumors. On the other hand, the crazy leper with 7 years of interpretive dance training might just be the mad wizard they were looking for, in disguise. Nicodemus actually being a working-class mad archmage named Nikos, said Nikos being bugfuck crazy. a stirring condemnation of their own moral failings as adventurers, chicken-headed elves, zero-level versions of the Human Torch, Spider Elf, Dr. Ironbutt, the smelliest hashish dealer in the world, the sewers of Arcombe, yet again, clinically depressed sewer giants, the hand people being literally people with hands for heads, and flamethrowers, just because, the troubling possibility of a hand people frog cult alliance, the sewer freak tribe, the fact that you can have up to 3 patrons, and screw them all over if you're both very lucky, and very powerful, but even then, you'll probably end up batshit crazy as your best-case scenario. The twice-confirmed realization that walking through a sequester trap is not a good idea under any circumstances. The reality that using up personality points as a dump stat can have really serious consequences. The tragic death of Ted, scarring Bill forever. The mad wizard Nikos' big lesson being that he's an asshole. Heroism and morality as adventurers, not being all it's cracked up to be. The Eco-Ogre Army is coming. Title: DCC Campaign Report Date May 7, 2014. In this shocking adventure the PCs encountered the surprising reality that extra-dimensional tentacled entities make good leather workers and appreciate reggae music. The unsurprising confirmation that the desert nomads would be seriously grief-stricken by news of Ted's death, including the tearing of robes and hair, the covering of the face with sand and ashes, the wailing and lamentations of women, and the beating of heads against rocks. The moderately insightful discovery that blaming the death of the greatest elven camel racer of all time would just about be enough to unite the desert tribes in holy war against the eco-ogres. The more unexpected discovery that having a drunken metal-skinned cleric swear to take on the eco-ogres chieftain in a singular combat of champions would totally seal the deal. The repeated confirmation that partying with desert nomad booze is a generally bad idea. The anthropological insight that desert nomads and eco-ogres alike follow the laws of the desert, particularly the rule that oases are absolutely neutral ground. The entirely predictable personal realization that the PCs are quite prepared to shit all over the laws of the desert. The totally from left field discovery that some oasis lagoons have magic talking otters living in them. The follow-up discovery that said otters are grumpy misanthropes who want to be left alone. The unfortunate conclusion that one well-placed explosive desert nomad is not enough to take out 40 eco-ogres in one shot. The expectable development that adding 1,000 water dragon hatchlings to an oasis may save your ass from the eco-ogres, but will do nothing to gain you the trust and friendship of the magic otter. The completely unusual sudden arrival of time dinosaurs. The delightful surprise of finding that time dinosaurs are both sophisticated and pious. The unwittingly problematic aspects of asking the time dinosaurs to drop you off somewhere really safe. The biological cultural division of elven kind. And the fascinating discovery that hipster elves are very different in personality from smug elves. The disturbing Huxleyan connotations of the elven Silver Dome panopticon and the smug elves' suffocatingly controlled society. The systemic implication that magic is really the unstable manipulation of uncontrolled nanites. The troubling prospect of being obliged to spend the next several millennia in a government-mandated data entry job under the benevolent oppressive rule of the elven Queen Jenny. The disturbing dystopia of an elven civilization that would think nothing of having your brain rewired to help you conform for your own security. The religious epiphany that God, in spite of having seriously flawed programming, can occasionally be vitally useful in saving you from a lifetime of serving as a zoological study subject. The thematic moral that a safe place is not really where you want to spend your days if you like being an adventurer. And with that, it appears to be goodbye to Arcombe and hello to the tangled forest. This after having said hello to Arcombe and goodbye to the elven Rose Dome. So we could add one more detail to our list that the player characters have now discovered a clearly emerging pattern of them arriving at a new home area, promptly making the place worse by their very presence, and then when it's really wrecked to epic proportions, getting the fuck out of Dodge. RPG Pundit. Currently smoking Ashton Old Church Rhodesian plus C&D's Crowley's Best. Title: on my DCC campaign date, May 15, 2014. My own Dungeon Crawl Classics game has only been 2 sessions, but they were amazing sessions. My game setting is a world where humanity is nearly extinct, and the world itself is some kind of immense life preserver. At the end of the universe, a superspecies, trapping the last star left in the universe, and used it to escape the end of all things. Only now the superspecies is gone. Their AI, God, has gone senile. His living programs, daemons, have rebelled. Terrible mutations have arisen in the original species, and everything has basically gone to shit. The humans had apparently originally been called up to be indentured farm servants. The elves were supervisors. Dwarves worked deep in the underground world machines, and halflings' role is not clear. But after the ancient ones vanished, the halflings became almost feral cannibalistic bandits in the woods. Dwarves were forced out of the deep places by horrific goblin hordes, tentacle things, and their gnomish masters. The elves continued sleepily into a helpless decadence in their automated pleasure domes, very slowly losing all their knowledge and wisdom to become shallow, self-absorbed drug-addled dilettantes, and the humans were slowly wiped out by plague, mutation, undeath, and attacks by monstrosities. It's possible that there's still other human survivors besides the PCs out there. There were other human settlements in the time of the ancient ones, and it's not clear how they might have fared in the thousands of years hence. There is even a legend about a great human city named Arkholm on the other side of the world. But the PCs only know that their village, the last in the 5 valleys, was overrun by zombies. Their party survived, escaping through a deep tunnel into the rose pleasure dome of the elves. Now they're based there, and recently helped the elven elder, the only one there who more or less still knows something or cares about something, to retrieve a power sphere from the 9th dimension, from the Grey Men and their dreaded Queen Priscilla. Unfortunately, the absolute earliest we'll be playing again is late June. It was awesome. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Now with more gender indeterminate wizards. Date: May 28, 2014. In this weekend's camping expedition, adventure, the PCs were lost in the Tanglewood forest, drawn to the conclusion that it was better just to wander around looking for things to kill, rather than trying to spend hours crafting some elaborate plan to take out the smug elves. Ambushed by a force of evil forest centaurs, informed that forest centaurs are dicks, reminded with lethal force that 0-level characters shouldn't act like heroes, made aware that, like in most of the last world, actual humans are a rarity, however. In this region of the world there is a particular superabundance of mutants. Surprised by the fact that apparently shaggy red caveman mutants are often also psychics, sent the message that their attempt to stop the eco-ogre attack on Arkholm had failed, not surprised by how little they cared now that they were safely a half-continent away from the eco-ogres and their eye-tyrant overlords. Warmly greeted by Bolto, the conversation-starved production robot, able to recruit Bolto to their group by engaging in such diverse topics, like do you think that there is a practical difference between alligators and crocodiles, and what is your favorite letter of the alphabet, and why? Confronted by 3 of the gender-variant and indeterminate archwizards of the grand, inclusive, and non-hierarchical Azure Order, only slightly less surprised than the Azure Wizards when the PC's own gender-indeterminate wizard politely declined joining them, since he doesn't actually feel oppressed or set apart at all for being trigendered, as the wizard's 10-year-old player called it. Warned about cannibal vines, nevertheless taken totally by surprise by cannibal vines, at the cost of Merrick the wizard's life. Witnesses to a cannibal vine planting operation undertaken by a trio of easily spooked furry mutants, able to reach the Azure Tower, only to be sent off immediately to deal with the furry mutants and the toad wizard of Bob Gobdabolts, who as usual want to bury the whole world in mud and swamp. Forced to face the fact that Bill the elf is in serious repressed grief for his brother Ted's death, and looking for substitute Teds in all the wrong places. Unexpectedly drawn into a drumming competition with the furry mutant tribe, clever enough to discover that Bolto can double as an excellent steel drum, able to win over the furry mutants against the toad wizard through the power of aggressive drumming alone. Quick to learn that having 50 furry mutant braves at your command is not nearly as useful as it sounds. Successful at blowing both the toad wizard and his toad fiend to little bits, with Relatively little help from the cowardly and largely useless furry mutants, determined to settle down for a good long time in the village of the Azure Order. Tower, to spend a year's sabbatical for relaxation and self-improvement. Title: DCC Campaign Update Date, June 12, 2014. In this weekend's adventure, the PC party came to the conclusion that the village of outcasts under the Azure Tower was a fairly good place to spend a gap year. Unicorns are actually assholes, especially lightning unicorns. The red mutants don't mess around. The fundamental curse of the brassiere of femininity is that the clasp is really difficult to get off. The Azure Order's transmutation lab facilities are second to none. It was a tough year to be a cleric back in Arkham. If you're a cleric who gets tortured by people everywhere you go, after a while you just start to assume it's going to happen. The eye tyrants must be stopped. Only Grenoble the Pious, the greatest cleric who ever lived, might be able to stop them. Unfortunately, he's lost somewhere in the outer dimensions, and would first need to be found, and possibly rescued before he can call down divine aid against the eye tyrants. To do this, the team would need to find Anthraz the Destroyer, the greatest adventurer of all time according to his reputation. Red mutants may not mess around, but they're also definitely not fireproof. The Orc Hills are conspicuously absent of orcs. It remains to be seen whether the limitless mountains have any limits. When you're facing down 90 black mutant dervishes, it's time to call for divine aid. When that divine aid takes the form of a hologram of Anthraz, it means he probably does live up to his reputation. When Tiamat, who usually promises her faithful she'll send a dragon to help, makes it explicitly clear she will not be sending any dragons, that makes you pay attention. Even if your campaign-long wish is to grow dragon wings, doing it when you're about to meet the human who's single-handedly slaughtered more dragons in his life than you've eaten Cheetos is probably the worst possible time. No matter how much you might want to own Caliburn, the deadliest magical sword in the world, or a suit of quantum night plate armor, it's probably not worth having to fight the guy who won them in the first place, no matter how wizened and decrepit he might appear. Nor would it seem a good idea to try to steal some of his loot and run for it when he can casually dig out and freely give away a trapped Ifrit with a teleportation boon from under the nearest pile of huge diamonds. Anthraz sounds a little like Grandpa Simpson if he was crossed with Dirty Harry. These days, Anthraz is mostly interested in playing checkers. When you hit level 10, there's really not much left to motivate you to go adventuring. While he fought back the Lord of the Dark Ones, murdered the evil Dolphin King, defeated the cult of Scaros, and wrestled a really large crocodile, Anthraz's greatest accomplishment may be his ability to spot a brassiere of femininity from a mile away. The temptation to have one last checkers match with his last surviving party mate is almost enough to convince Anthraz to seek out Grenoble, but only if the PCs will first complete a quest to prove they aren't just a bunch of dumb kids. If they have to fulfill a quest to satisfy Anthraz, the ultimate choice for the PCs is that while it might be easiest to slay the peace-loving dragon of Coranian Pass, the cost in terms of PC-dragon relations would be too high, and while stealing the magic wafer from the cyborg grandmother's Death Fortress is tempting, they already know that high-tech traps are extra deadly. Thus, the wisest quest to embark upon will be to burn down the bungalow of the beach giant chiefs. When you're a red mutant who was charmed by someone with a brassiere of femininity, only to later encounter your charmer sans bras, everything you know about your life suddenly comes into question. And the quote of the night? DCC sure has taught us a lot about tolerance. There's a string of words that might never have been heard in that particular sequence before. For the record, since some people have apparently been under the impression that the order of gender-variant wizards might be an insulting sort of mockery that's going on, it's actually not. Yes, there's some funny elements to the Azure Order, if you haven't guessed. Already this is a campaign that is poking a bit of fun at everything. However, the humor has never been at the expense of either gender identity or sexual orientation. And in fact, the Azure Order are, thus far in the campaign, the only large-scale group that have been depicted as both, A, unquestionably the good guys, their mission being to protect the weak and outcasts and oppose evil in all its forms, and B, at the same time actually both competent and powerful. There's a reason the PCs have taken to hanging out with them, from what they've seen so far of a shitty post-apocalyptic fantasy world, the Azure Order are a shining light, even if things occasionally get a little Portlandia with them. RPG Pundit. Currently smoking. Lorenzetti Oversize plus H&H's Beverwick. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Date: June 2006, 2014. In this week's adventure, the PCs went on a long overland trek to find the Gemstone River, where nary a gemstone was found, bypass the smug elves' dome, burn a magical featherboat, to magically create a boat that was slightly too large to navigate the river, find that in spite of not being programmed for aquatic service, Bolto the robot makes a decent gondolier, float past a purple mutant barbarian village to an unfriendly reception, leave the purple mutants confused as to whether a boat with a cloud of darkness was actually a demon or not, discover that at least one purple mutant wanted to cast magic missile at the darkness, but could not because he was not a wizard, encounter a living tree, a Trent, who collected potions, discover that apparently all Trents enjoy collecting curios of some sort or another, realize that camping outside the boat runs the risk of kobold marauders trying to steal your boat in the night, get some serious divine aid overkill when God turned a significant part of the river to a block of solid ice to make sure the kobolds couldn't get away, learn that being stuck in a block of slowly melting ice for much of the day leaves you vulnerable to a massive orc attack. Note that casting darkness on your boat may confuse purple mutants, but does nothing to dissuade orcs. Find that at least one orc wanted to cast magic missile at the darkness, and was indeed a wizard, but could not, because he took an arrow through the heart from, the psychic red mutant caveman before he could pull it off. Nod with wisdom at how what divine aid causes, divine aid can cure. Realize that Scorching Ray does not do well against drenched orcs. Leave behind a perfectly good boat when the river turns. Note with confusion that the wasted lands are actually a fairly lush verdant plain. Learn that the wasted lands may be called that because of an overabundance of very hostile humanoids. Learn that on the other hand, it's also possible that the wasted lands may be called that because of the preferred vices of the beach giant chiefs. Take zoological record of the fact that imp familiars are a favored food of giant prairie owls. Encounter a particularly tough horde of dog-faced humanoids. Discover that when imploring God, a burn the heretic's mentality seems more effective than a help me to show them the righteous path mentality. Finally reach the bungalow of the beach giant chiefs, only to have to pause there with almost a month to wait until the next session. Damn. RPG Pundit. Currently smoking Masonic Meerschaum plus Image Perique. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Sort of date: July 9th, 2014. So this is not technically an update of my DCC campaign, because we didn't play this weekend. Instead, on Sunday, I went off to a special gaming con being put together as part of a larger series of youth events this winter vacation by the Montevideo City government. 2D4orcos.com, the local gaming forum, had helped coordinate it, and I was invited to run a game. Since I always like helping 2D4orcos out, I agreed. I'd kind of forgotten that this was going to take place the weekend after the release of 5e D&D. As it turns out, it was quite the experience. The adulation I got from some of the gamers there was pretty awesome, I have to admit. It was also awesome that I was running DCC, and over at the table next to mine, they were playing Lords of Olympus, which has become very popular in Uruguay. But anyways, we played with a group of 5. One was a gaming veteran, the other 4 relative newbies. A group of 4 friends in their late teens who had each played an RPG between 0 to 3 times. None had ever played an old-school RPG before. In fact, only one had ever played D&D. In this adventure, our intrepid substitute heroes learned that, among the mutant villages of the Tangled Forest, a mudraker earns more than either a baker or a gaucho, but not as much as a con artist. No one trusts the transparent mutants. The forest is littered with the ruins of the great neutral kingdom, who were too indecisive to stop the onslaught of the forces of law and/or chaos. The triangle mutants are too caught up in their war with the square mutants to give a crap about figuring out what monstrosity came out of the ancient ruins to massacre the stick mutants. Cannibal riverweed is nothing to trifle with. On the other hand, Cannibal riverweed looks like a walk in the park compared to a vicious giant wiener dog. When your best warrior has a crippling phobia of bright lights, it's not a good idea to cast spells that mercurially involve flashes of bright light, especially if said warrior is the only thing standing between you and a giant killer wiener dog. When exploring the ruined metal temples of the ancients, it's not necessarily a good idea to press a bunch of buttons on any old panel you come across. Killer robots come in square and triangular forms. Coincidence? Probably not. When a single level -1 warrior is the last man standing against a killer robot, making use of the ruins' automated traps can be a life-saving and adventure-defining moment. Unfortunately, finding a big locker full of still viable ancient tech is not worth that much when one of your mutants doesn't have the wherewithal to estimate the blast radius of an ancient incendiary grenade. At the end of the day, the body count was 4 dead out of a total of 7 characters made. The PCs killed a patch of killer riverweed, a giant wiener dog, and 2 evil robots. They successfully avoided getting into fights with either the triangle or the square mutants. Everyone had a grand time. Title: DCC Campaign Archive Update. Date: July 23, 2014. In this weekend's adventure, continuing the quest to burn down the bungalow of the beach giant chiefs, the PCs spent the night trying to answer the question, where do beach giants poop? Playing the waiting game, when they found the answer to the above were several hours of staking out the local shithole in order to ambush beach giants 1 or 2 at a time, coming to terms with the fact that, while they always knew being a cleric was a dirty job, it was never quite so literal as when the group's iron cleric decided to hide in the oversized latrine hole to get maximum benefit from a surprise attack, when beach giants are, shall we say, at their most vulnerable. Feeling a bit of an "are we the baddies" moment about having to destroy the beach giant's home just to fulfill the whim of a crazy old adventurer. Feeling quite a bit less bad when they figure out that the cause of frequent latrine visits among the beach giants is due to eating poorly cooked human. Eventually figuring out the latrine goers are starting to be missed, and choosing instead to find out just how much beach giants value their surfboards, trying to beat a hasty retreat when the entire population of the bungalow of the beach giant chiefs comes at them with a vengeance for burning down their surf shack. Uncovering the interesting fact of the beach giants' diplomatic ties to the stoner giants and the cloudy giants, also, apparently, to the bears. Confirming that the stoner giants are in fact made out of stone, but that's not why they're called stoner giants. Further discovering that the cloud that surrounds a cloudy giant is not water vapor, but more of a purple haze. Learning that if you get your patron Tiamat to summon you a local dragon, and that dragon turns out to be a puff magic dragon, it's not going to be of much use to you in the mission. Deciding that if you want to tear the roof off a giant bungalow and set it ablaze from within, it may be best to just roll up your draconically transformed sleeves and do it yourself, getting stuck after the mission is completed, partly due to having to rescue 2 of your teammates. 1. The victim of underestimating the maximum possible range of a giant's boulder, the other staying up after a direct hit from a portable ballista, only to be dropped by yet another rock, but mainly because they found out that most of the giant's treasure can be found in the cave complex under the burnt ruins of the bungalow. Discovering, after charming the orc messenger sent to discuss hostage negotiations, that the orcs are completely sick of the beach giants, and there may be an entire rebel tribe of orcs down there too. And that was it for this session. Stay tuned for the next part in a couple of weeks. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Now with more eye tyrants. Date: August 5th, 2014. In this week's very special episode, the gang learned some important lessons. Large manufacturing robots who can't modulate the volume of their voice make very lousy disguised trees. There are times when you should just quit while the quitting is good, and when you've rescued your captured wizard and have dozens and dozens of beach giants hunting for you, that's one of those times. Anthraz the Destroyer did not die of old age while the PC party was away, but it really could have gone either way. Before you get to go on a trans-dimensional adventure with Anthraz the Destroyer, you have to repair his fence. In exchange, you will get a shiny gold piece and a rambling grandpa lecture about thrift. Pretty well all portals to the ninth dimensional gray realms are really odd, but entering the side of a cow to cross over takes it to a whole new level. You never know when, while in the ninth dimension, a serious knowledge of Glee trivia might come in handy. Queen Priscilla of the Gray Realms tries to act like a high school teeny bopper, inasmuch as a huge gray blob creature can do so, but she's been on the throne for at least 35 years. If Queen Priscilla had a massive crush on your dead twin brother, that may open some doors. On the other hand, if she's really more interested in everyone feeling sorry for, and paying attention to, her for, having a dead boyfriend, suggesting that you might be able to bring him back to life is not going to get you far. It shouldn't surprise anyone that Queen Priscilla doesn't feel she has to actually embrace any active religious devotion to God, or strive to become a better person in general, because she already feels she's like totally really spiritual. You can try to reason with ninth dimensional gray blob people at a bereavement prom as long as you like, but the tricentenarian warrior in power armor blows DJ Jazzy Blob straight to hell. Conversation time is over. If you put two really old semi-retired adventurers together, the sexism and the complaining about kids today levels are likely to get pretty high. Why would the world's most powerful cleric and therefore greatest healer be nearly deaf? Stubborn refusal to acknowledge reality. Arcombe was no jewel of a city when the PCs actually lived there, but after they left it really went to shit. Is it advisable to leave the rest of your party to go look for your old stuff and your former dealer, when there's an army of thousands of eco-ogres and eye-tyrants about to destroy the city? Probably not, but it is hilarious. Wizard plus eye-tyrant plus spell duel plus phlogiston disturbance equal to awesome. Sometimes you get an amulet of extra life, just in time. Rings of invisibility are awesome, but rings of invisibility that mean you're being constantly stared at and heckled by the Zaz, the Dark Lord of the North, can get annoying really fast. In the middle of an apocalyptic eye-tyrant invasion, the safest place in town to be is Bob Shawgoth's head shop. If you serve a demon who rebelled against God, casting Invoke Patron within a sacred altar space of God isn't a good idea for anyone. For the greatest cleric who ever lived, using the wrath of God to blast thousands of eye-tyrants straight to hell is no problem. It's avoiding being backstabbed right through the throat by a Halconlord assassin that's difficult. Duke Halcon's second-in-command, the Thrush, is a top-notch assassin, but even he can take only so many magic missiles. An eye-tyrant shunted into another plane by a phlogiston disturbance is not a problem you can just forget about indefinitely. For the greatest cleric who ever lived, surviving being stabbed through the throat by the Thrush is no problem. It's avoiding being disintegrated by an eye-tyrant beam that's difficult. God's ways are beyond mortal ken, but at the end of the day, in this kind of world, if you've managed to stop one of countless world-threatening evils, you have to call it a job well done. Title: DCC Campaign Update, Gold Eater, and the Derpy Horse of Destiny. Date: August 21st, 2014. In this week's fun-soaked adventure, the PCs were shocked by the fact that Bolto the conversation-loving robot makes an awful barista. The airing of Matlock would lead the world's greatest and oldest human adventurer to use a cracker of wishing to get them back to his palace on time. The defeat of the eye-tyrants, but not the Halconlords, and their guiding daemon Zargon, would end up ruining a far too intricate-to-work plan on the part of Sezrican. The demon Zaz was perilously close to capturing the Derpy Horse of Destiny in order to ritually sacrifice it and thus finally be able to transcend the Clepothic breach to take on material form in the world and conquer it. The Derpy Horse of Destiny was recently spotted somewhere in the Great Furry Plains. If the plan to have the eye-tyrants and Halconlords mutually destroy each other doesn't work, one can always try to enact a plan to get the Halconlords and the demon Zaz destroy each other. Ancient burial mounds are a dangerous place, if you believe a totally insane transparent mutant druid. Choosing to put a drug-dealing human together with a drug-smoking elf for the first watch of the night is generally a bad idea. If you are sufficiently stoned, a sequester alarm just sounds like an annoying buzzing noise in your head. The lumpy brown mutants are vassals of the gold mutants of the grand city of Gold Halcon, which may or may not have anything to do with the Halconlords. It's not clear. Gold Halcon is ruled by Gold Eater, the criminal mastermind. Gold mutants literally eat gold to become more powerful. Gold Eater has apparently eaten a lot of gold in his long lifespan. Gold Eater also has a council of 7.5 wizards, a dangerous bodyguard named Mr. Shin, who has a deadly cravat, plus lasers, land sharks with lasers attached to their heads, a semi-secret volcano, bunker hideout just outside the city, control over orbital death satellites, a plan to extort 1 million gold pieces from the neighboring kingdoms, and a sensible and progressive municipal gun control policy. Gold Eater also has a potentially copyright-infringing theme song. Gold Eater is, in spite of all this, the good guy compared to the demon Zaz. The Great Furry Plains is apparently populated by tribes of people who like to dress up as animals. The Capricorn Village, found on the plains, is a friendly community full of people who like to dress up as goats, rams, sheep, and one gorilla that may actually just be a real gorilla. Gold Mutant Teamsters, in spite of working for a notoriously murderous criminal mastermind, are still really lazy. The demon Zaz has sent not one but 2 of his Wraith Princes to capture the Derpy Horse of Destiny. There's also an elite team of Halcon Lord assassins heading to the increasingly crowded Great Furry Plains. The Derpy Horse of Destiny is the descendant of the primordial Horse King, Pure, bred to maintain all of his ancestors' magical power and thus hopeless inbred. He wanders the last world seeking to bring joy and do good deeds for all living beings and leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. The Derpy Horse of Destiny, in spite of being protected by the forces of destiny and the ebb and flow of fortune and misfortune, can be captured by sufficiently powerful spell checks. Astonishingly, a group of lollygagging teamsters taken by surprise are absolutely no match for an equal number of highly trained Halcon Lord assassins. Likewise, a team of veteran gold mutant soldier goons are no match for a Wraith Prince. On the other hand, a Wraith Prince is no match for a sufficiently powerful gender-bending magic missile. When figuring out what to do with a derpy magic horse, it's a bad idea to totally forget that there was a second Wraith Prince in the vicinity. At the end of the day, no matter how lovable and lucky a Derpy Horse of Destiny may be, no amount of derping around can save it from Sezrecan getting what Sezrecan wants. Unbeknownst to almost anyone, recently deceased derpy horses lay eggs. Title: DCC Campaign Update Date, September 7th, 2014. Today, the PCs were forced to confront the interdimensional, unfathomable terror of having your drug dealer, who happens to be a Shoggoth with a fondness for reggae, send out a distress message in your fever dreams revealing he's been kidnapped. The bizarre consequences of having your very being touched by a thing man was not meant to know, much less get weed from. The realization that the first stage of Shoggoth-touched madness is having your farts shoot acid. The news that Bob Shoggoth has apparently been kidnapped by a long-vanished order of elven Ultratech knights. The curious fact that humans who smoke Shoggoth weed will become mutants, while elves who smoke Shoggoth weed suffer from a much weirder fate. The urgency of the need to go rescue him, once a tentacle eye stalk that is not your own begins to emerge from your ass. The further greed motivation that emerges on learning that Bob Shoggoth knows the hidden location of a mint-condition GCM-L Pythian power armor complete with jetpack and butt rocket accessories. The return of the smug elves of the Silver Dome, mistakenly attacking the PCs while looking for the Pythian Knights. The increasing seriousness of the situation when the tentacle eye stalk thing in your posterior grows a mouth and starts to sing Tiny Tim songs, and later vomits vanilla ice cream. The troubling OOCRL development that the mention of ice cream leads all the players to want to go get some ice cream, in spite of the in-game ice cream coming out of a tentacle thing lodged in the elf PC's ass. The unchanging crapulence of the everyone-hating purple mutants of Cordalan. The tragic destruction by fire of the tentacle eye stalk Tiny Tim singing ice cream spewing mythos butt monster, just when the elf was starting to like having it around. The somber realization that said destruction was probably for the best as the tentacle thing kept getting bigger and more elaborate, and that whole situation was heading towards nowhere good. The entry into the humanoid Badlands en route to Yeti country. The long-awaited thrilling encounter with the Pythian night kidnappers of Bob Shoggoth. The strong suspicion, upon noticing the presence of fake elf ears and patchwork armors, that the kidnappers are not so much Pythian knights as they are a Pythian night cosplayer society. The confirmation of said suspicion when they spot that one cosplayer, found in every group of cosplayers who really isn't even trying. In this case, having just put a box over his torso with the word Pythian written on it, and not even written in Elvish. The dark decision to kill most of them anyways, except for Box Guy and Guy armed with a stick he's pretending is a wand of lightning bolt. The inevitable interplayer fight over who gets to loot the least shitty of the Pythian armors. The rescue of Bob Shoggoth, and unanimous decision to carry on in search of the Pythian power armor. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Giant Weasels Rip Their Flesh. Date: September 17, 2014. In this adventure, the PCs haphazardly dashed into a group of prisoners of the Pythian Night Cosplay Society, who had no choice but to join the party as retainers. One of those prisoners, who happened to be a purple mutant with a bag of seriously hallucinogenic mushrooms. A crazy series of trans-dimensional effects that seemingly wiped out half the party, all because Bob Shoggoth got high on the shrooms. The accidental lobotomization of one of the brand new party members, for the same reason as above. An emergency retreat back to the Azure Tower, where the incredulous Azure Order mages were forced to confront the possibility of a good Shoggoth, not to mention a reggae-loving Rasta Shoggoth. The annoyed conclusion of the Order that while Bob Shoggoth is not evil, he's not really good either, and is definitely still dangerous. A second expedition in search of the mint-condition Pythian power armor suit, with jetpack and butt rockets. The in hindsight unfortunate decision not to invite along the one Shoggoth who knows the exact location of the half-sunken temple where the power armor is located. The decision to avoid the humanoid Badlands and the purple mutant territory by cutting across the forest toward the Fur Bay. The tragic confirmation that two-headed grass snakes are in fact very poisonous, ruining what could have been a potentially lucrative setup for creating a hallucinogenic mushroom business. The discovery that the Fur Bay is not named that way because of fur trading, nor because it is populated by furries like the Great Furry Plains, but because it is a deeply polluted body of mutagenic water that is nearly covered in fur-like green algae. Having to cope with the fact that they live in a world where there's actually a town called Bad Breath. Having to further cope with the fact that this town is ruled over by a guy literally named Lord Dread, who rules from Castle Dread. The not entirely surprising revelation that Lord Dread is in fact a mustache-twirling, dressed all in black would-be villain with a stupid plan to unite the Badland humanoids under his command to take over the entire region. The useful but untimely discovery that hallucinogenic mushrooms are lethally toxic to goblins. A surprisingly friendly entente with Lord Dread, moving on from Castle Dread to the town of High Bay. The not entirely surprising confirmation that High Bay is so named not because it is at some kind of position of geographical altitude, but because it is an important mercantile port for the illicit drug trade. Discovering that High Bay is no peaceful, dirty hippie town, though it is full of peaceful, dirty hippies. The actual people in command are all very sober, well-armed, and ruthless businessmen. The taking of heavy amounts of mushrooms to try to contact Bob Shoggoth unsuccessfully, while ending up in a compromising situation with a pair of gray mutant courtesans and a blue mutant midget pretending to be an erotic halfling. Further explorations of similar levels of psychedelia, leading to waking up in possession of a hollow gaming device of unknown origin, a pirate hat, and a mysterious bobblehead doll, a changed elf, swearing to cut down on the drugs, and even the surprisingly wise decision not to try something called assassin's weed, the shocking revelation that Bolto, the conversation robot, has been commandeered by the city government to serve as an entertainment for the High Council, a bureaucratic maze in High Bay City Hall, as threatening as any dungeon, if said dungeon was non-lethal and incredibly annoying. The confirmation that serious amounts of cash being thrown at corrupt civil servants will cut right through the maze-like process. The by now not surprising at all discovery that the High Council are so named because they're all constantly high. The valuable illumination into the real power in charge of the city is the chief city officer of The bureaucracy, who's never touched a drug in his life, aside from ale and rhinoceros blood. The tense negotiations with Chief City Officer Swanley, which lead to Bolto being given a free choice as to whether he wishes to continue with the party or accept a civil service job, well paid with benefits, in High Bay. The disappointment of Bolto deciding he can have a life full of more interesting conversations among the balls-tripping stoners of the High Council than he could continuing with the PCs. The departure from High Bay, knowing that they've lost a semi-valuable party member but gained a useful contact in local town government. The continued trek toward the perverted swamp, interrupted by a horrifying attack from vicious giant weasels. The death of 2 more newbie party members, giant weasels having ripped their flesh. The determination to hold fast and bunker down in the Weasel Plains, halfway between High Bay and the perverted swamp, while the elf spends 48 hours in constant and unwavering occult theory work in order to gain a bonus spell. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Inside the Perverted Swamp. Date: October 4, 2014. In this week's action-packed adventure, the heroic PCs camped out on the coastline and ran into the pirates of the Furry Bay. Found out that with pirates, women are bad luck. Found out that with pirates, humans are bad luck. Found out that with pirates, elves are bad luck. Found out that with pirates, just about everything is bad luck. Decided to leave the pirates, as they were too ridiculous. Met Frenchie, the old grizzled gold mutant prospector. That is, a gold mutant who pans for gold, not a dude who prospects gold mutants. Contracted Frenchie with the promise of as much gold as he could eat, if he'd guide them into the perverted swamp, past the dangerous and savage nudist mutants, and into the half-sunken temple. On entering the swamp, learned that nudist mutants look just like naked humans except for the little black bar with the word censored floating in front of their junk. Drove off dangerous nudist mutants by making a series of silly animal sounds. Had a dangerous encounter with a giant swamp crocodile after eating its eggs for breakfast. Hightailed it to the half-sunken temple, chased by 200 nudist mutants. Discovered that the temple was the only good place to take refuge from the horde of deadly nudist mutants. That's the good news. The bad news is that the reason they don't dare enter is that it's supposed to be haunted. Went in anyways, of course. Left their horses outside right by the temple arch, knowing the mutants wouldn't dare come so near. That's true, but they did dare to throw a few hundred spears at the horses, killing them all. Faced a knob-polishing robot. Discovered that if you destroy a knob-polishing robot's knobs, he gets understandably pissed and goes on a kill-all-humans rampage. Had a near fatality from elven friendly fire. Saw the same elf then use his mighty power rings against the robot, to almost no effect. Upon defeating the knob-polishing robot, spent several days in the haunted temple recovering. Assisted their recovery on discovering that a piece of loot they'd been carrying with them for ages was actually a mechanical jug that generates curative alcohol. Proceeded to generate curative alcohol out of water, and then out of urine. And when the urine ran out, they got really desperate and used their regular alcohol. Found that curative alcohol certainly cures, but it also sure packs a punch. While recovering, had yet another near fatality due to elven friendly fire when said elf went mad trying to contact his daemon patron. Also witnessed said elf lose his elven ears, or in fact any ears for that matter, to corruption, which the rest of the party thought was the very least the fucker deserved at that point after nearly killing 2 of his teammates. Found a room full of coins and bones. They wisely chose not to proceed, especially after discovering a tentacled wall clinger. Proceeded to burn said tentacled wall clinger to death. Discovered a bronze door with an iron handle claw. Realized that the magic user's weird mercurial effect wherein casting color spray causes the nearest iron object to rust would prove enormously useful to get past the door. Exercised extreme caution in the tunnel full of shades. Saw the elf use his mighty power rings against the shades. To enormous effect. Found a sunken, partially flooded room, and no sign of the mint condition Pythian power. Armor suit with jetpack and butt rockets that appeared to have been looted long ago. Saw the group's magic user fall down a drain trap while exploring said room. Feared the magic user's death, but in the underwater drain said magic user made a lucky choice of where to swim, and found his way not only to breathable air but to the real armor room complete with mint condition. Pythian power armor suit, with jetpack and butt rockets. While busy trying to catch up to the magic user, had no idea that said magic user had also encountered the ghost of Great Bertha, previous owner of said power armor. The magic user wisely chose not to confront Great Bertha in single combat for the armor particularly, since said power armor was clearly designed with female proportions in mind, and the party's very tough female warrior was on the way. Made a tactical decision as a party upon arrival to ignore Great Bertha's demands for single combat and just slaughtered the ghost en masse. Obtained the Pythian power armor, finding it to have superlight maneuverability, jetpack, and high explosive butt rockets, though only 4 of the original 12 butt rockets yet remain. They also found the seal attachment that grants defense against energy attacks. Found a sword as well, which immediately took mental control of the surprisingly weak-willed magic user. But since the sword is a kick-ass Pythian wizardbane sword with a dozen powers, no one seemed to mind much. Not even the magic user. Felt a little less certain, out of character, when they realized the sword is also as much of a dick as any elf, particularly an elf from the last great elven military empire, and wants to restore the world to law, and by law, it means a situation where elves run everything and everyone else licks their boots. Promptly plain stepped back home, leaving behind the dead horses and the hundreds of violent nudist mutants. They took Frenchie with them, though. Title: DCC Campaign Update, Bad Choices Edition. Date: October 22, 2014. In this past adventure, the PCs unexpectedly encountered a highly successful phylactery spell, only to have the elf who cast it left wondering where to safely put his new-made soul crystal. The first of a series of bad choices, the elf handing over his phylactery to his ultra-powerful, ultra-selfish archmage patron. In the second, in a series of bad choices, the other elf faking his way into the Azure Order, the Order sending its newly made member off to investigate reports of woodland animals, acting in strange and violent ways, driving out the local mutant communities. An encounter with a frantic brown mutant, the last of his tribe not to have fled or died, at the hands of the crazy forest druid's army of woodland mammals, plus 1 duck. After brief initial skepticism, confirmation of the woodland terror when the party is set upon by a highly organized guerrilla assault from vicious electro squirrels, even as the party's horses go out of control. Well, their riders' control at least. The frightening possibility of being total party killed by a bunch of squirrels. The one PC who fled the scene ending up facing a beret-wearing revolutionary bear. Said PC fortunately remembering the old adage about playing dead when confronted with a bear. Said PC unfortunately committing the third bad choice of the night, choosing to forget the prior adage to try to use chill touch to little effect, other than being beaten unconscious by the gorilla bear. The fortunate survival of the rest of the party, meanwhile, thanks to the timely application of the Pythian sword's sonic blast, the group's luck running out when the party suffers a surprise attack from ninja badgers. In the fourth of a series of bad choices, the elf taking up the Pythian sword from the slain human wizard, the ultra-intelligent mind-controlling sword that he already knew, despised rogue daemons and chaos wizards. Said sword then manipulating the elf, through a freely taken magical oath, in what constitutes bad choice of the night number 5 to try to go find and kill the elf's patron, a rogue daemon chaos wizard, the very same one that has the elf's soul in a gem. A plain walk to said patron's personal domain, in what might almost certainly have been a very fatal bad choice were it not that the luckiest fumble of all time freed the elf just long enough for his patron not to have to destroy him utterly. The patron granting forgiveness, in the most asshole-ish way possible, through a binding geese on his elf servant, sending him on what may well be a suicide mission. In relation to the same, the shocking news that the daemon mistress of all dragons, Tiamat, is apparently mortally wounded in her own lair, assaulted by some powerful and terrible entity from the void beyond the limits of the universe. The GS mission, to be resolved as soon as possible, which is to say, after the crazy druid and his revolutionary army of anarcho-syndicalist woodland animals are defeated, consisting in destroying whatever attacked Tiamat, and then also destroying Tiamat. Meanwhile, the other elf, now a prisoner with a few others, of the crazy druid, finding that the druid is controlling the woodland creatures through a strange and terrible mammal-controlling gem that he has had bio-implanted right into his chest. Noting that the duck, however, is not controlled, not being a mammal, he is out to start a humanoid animal apocalyptic war for his own sinister purposes. In the sixth really bad decision of the night, the prisoner elf deciding to use his time to make a bond with a totally random patron, getting the Lord of all flesh as said patron, partly due to his membership in the Azure Order, which, it should be remembered, was done only as an opportunistic act of fraud. The rescue mission conducted by the Azure Order, where perhaps for the first time, the PCs see what the Azure Wizards are really capable of, with just a dozen of them taking on an entire army of vicious wolfshock troops, badger ninjas, beaver, engineers, electro squirrels, gorilla bears, and, of course, the evil duck. An epic escape from woodland custody, where salvation comes only when the Azure Wizard Leandra, with the help of her sorcery and her laser sword, takes down the crazy druid and shatters his hold over the forest animals. The apparently resolution of this week's crisis, with no one still alive having been left without at least some regrets. A shocking and terrifying denouement, after everyone thought all the horror was over, of a vicious night assault. From the evil duck who had survived his druid ally's death and came after the PCs in a mission of vengeance. The conclusion that ducks are the total assholes of the animal world. Title: DCC Campaign Update. What happens in the Dragon Mountains? Date: October 30th, 2014. In this adventure, the PCs managed to have both the Azure Order and Sezrikon very interested in discovering what has, perhaps mortally, wounded Tiamat and left her followers driven mad, to spend a couple of hours dicking each other around because the Sezrikon dude doesn't want to tell what he knows to the Azure Order dude, and vice versa. To discover that you can get your leather armor dyed in exchange for a reading from the Dwarven Book of Complaints, as long as it's dyed yellow, and you probably don't want to know how it's dyed yellow. To decide that they will go to Arkholm to seek out Bob Shoggoth and learn more about what has mortally wounded Tiamat, to the satisfaction of almost no one, except the elf. To find Arkholm even more of a shithole than the last time they left it. To teleport to a level that was supposed to be abandoned in the old days, but now in the newer, shittier Arkholm is the swamp temple of the frog daemon. To get there right in the middle of a ritual of human sacrifice, to bravely fight off the cultists, and then fight their way all the way up to the boundary line between the warring gangs of the frog cultists and the Halconlords. To identify themselves to the Halconlord guards as the party of Bill the Elf, one of the brave heroes who a year and a half ago saved Arkholm from the Eye Tyrants. To discover they did so only to have the Halconlords remember how 2 years ago Bill the Elf was one of those who intruded in their secret base, stole their hostages, and ruined their plans to end the gang war and take the whole city. Also, how a year and a half ago Bill the Elf's party were the ones who killed the Thrush, second in command of the Halconlords. To have to bravely flee the Halconlords to the relative safety of the frog cultist levels. To end up in a frantic running fight, one that almost kills half the party all the way down the cultist levels of the Snail Tower, out into the canyon bottom level of Arkholm, formerly known as the Barrens, but now known as They Discover, the Cannibal Vine Swamp, and just barely make it to the Cathedral Tower. To end up the prisoners of the Snake Witch, whose gang has returned from being almost wiped out to taking terrible revenge on Queen Boo Boo and her halflings, retaking the cathedral and slaughtering every last halfling in Snake Witch territory. To find that the Snake Witch, having Tiamat as her patron, has also gone mad. To drive Bill the Elf to the point that he couldn't take it any longer, and return to his former wacky weed-using ways, to reach Bob Shoggoth, to discover through Bob, or a drug-filled haze resembling Bob, that it is something called the Egg Beyond, that has entered this world and struck down Tiamat, and that it threatens to crack open the entire world. That it ate the stars of the universe 1,000,000 years ago, and now hungers to finally devour the last sun in this, the one world the ancient ones preserved. to express a determination to do whatever they can to stop this egg beyond, and the end of all life, outside the dark eternal void outside the universe. To feel dismay at Bob Shoggoth not liking their chances. To contact Caesarcon, only to have the latter decide he's sick of the PC's lollygagging around Arcom and teleport the whole party to the Dragon Mountains, near, but not too near, the lair of Tiamat, Queen, King of Dragons, now dying. To have Bill the Elf continue to keep secrets from the party, much to their confusion. To have the other elf, Rick, sometimes known as Rickandra for purely mercenary reasons, decide in that confusion to contact his new patron, the Lord of all flesh. To realize the depths of slimy perviness of the Lord of all flesh, as if the name alone was not hint enough. To make a really bad deal with the Lord of all flesh. To have the entire party, minus their guide Frenchie the Gold Mutant, the only character who saved his will roll black, out to discover the next day that they'd had some kind of demented orgy they thankfully have no recollection of. To agree that what happens in the Dragon Mountains stays in the Dragon Mountains. To discover that Frenchie is nowhere to be found, having apparently fled in terror and/or disgust. To press on toward Tiamat's lair, only to discover a band of 12 dwarves on a quest to slay the dragon and take its treasure to fund the recovery of their lost homeland, led by none other than Prince Bongo, son of Bong, who was slain when he attempted the same quest a generation ago, as was his father before him, and his grandfather and great-grandfather before him. To find these dwarves seriously equipped with their chainmail and traditional battle axes as well as their traditional monofilament whips, missile launchers, landmines, magnetic grenades, and blaster rifles. To encounter a mountain giant in the middle of the night, maddened and mutated by something from beyond, powerful, enough to barely be scratched by a landmine, and to snap a red mutant caveman psychic's leg like it was a twig. To fortunately manage to scare off the mountain giant with traditional elven magic, and to save the red mutant psychic caveman with traditional dwarven metabots and nanostoms. To reach the great Dragon Mountain, and thus the gateway to Tiamat's lair, and a confrontation to come with the egg beyond. Title: DCC Campaign, The 10 Blades of the Company of 10 Blades. Date: November 4th, 2014. Note: this relates to some material for the campaign that hasn't actually shown up yet in the campaign, so if you're playing in my DCC campaign and you read this, beware of spoilers. The following are all blades which were used by a great band of adventurers who were legendary in the region around Goldhalcon some 500 years ago. Until they were all slaughtered by the gargantuan dragon Bashafat, they were legendary for their adventuring and for all having awesome magic weapons. Today the swords are presumed to be found in the petrified corpse of Bashafat, somewhere in the area of the ominous range. 1. The Shattered Sword of Al-Hayad. This is a +2 longsword, neutral alignment. Intelligence 7, which was broken in the battle with Bashafat. Even broken, it still does 1d6 damage, with a +2 bonus to hit and damage. Its intellect is dormant while broken. If it were to be repaired somehow, it would awaken the sword's sprite, and the weapon would do an extra +2 versus any non-neutral beings, and an extra d10 damage against outsiders of any kind, be they archons of God, rebel daemons, or beings from the void beyond. The sword, when awake, will also do 2 horsepower's damage per round to the wielder if the wielder is not neutral. Unfortunately, the shattered sword is cursed to be broken again. Any time the sword gets a critical hit, there is a 1/6 chance that the sword will shatter. If it does so, the creature struck must make a DC 22 Fortitude save or die instantly as the sword breaks. 2. The Switchblade of Vinny the Elf. A retractable techno magical weapon. Activated by the use of a switch on the handle, the weapon has 3 settings: dagger, rapier, or comb. In dagger form, it does 1d4 +1, and has the quality of returning to the hand when thrown. As a rapier, it does 1d6 +1, and grants a +1 to the wielder's AC while using it. As a comb, it will with a single brush give the wielder an impeccable pompadour. 3. The Oranganium sword made from rare Oranganium, this orange, colored short sword grants +1 to hit and damage. It also grants any wielder with an intelligence of 8 or higher the ability to detect the presence of any mutants or goblinoids within 500, and the ability to see invisible creatures within 50. Use of either power requires light concentration. It does not happen automatically, but as long as the wielder is actively using the power, he may still take other actions regularly. A crude-looking dagger of primitive halfling construction, this dagger grants +1 to hit and damage. However, any creature struck by the dagger must make a fortitude save versus DC 14 or void their bowels. The intensity of this sudden expulsion will give the victim of the attack a -1 penalty to attacks, AC, and saving throws for the next 1d10 minutes. Every subsequent time the victim is struck by the dagger, they will continue to have horrific colon spasms, which will give another cumulative 1 penalty. This dagger also enhances its wielder's sense of smell, granting a +4 bonus to any detection roll based on sense of smell while wielding the dagger. The dagger is chaotic and has an intelligence of 7, and being of halfling sorcery, it will dominate any wielder of lesser intelligence and fill them with an irresistible desire to eat the flesh of their slain enemies, as is halfling tradition. 6. The not-so-wee bonny claymore of Angus Mac Bastard. This two-handed sword grants a +1 to hit and to damage. In the hands of a chaos-aligned warrior, it grants an extra +2 to hit and damage on any attack where the warrior makes a full running charge against his opponent. This sword also grants the wielder the power to speak and understand the Scotman language. 7. The absurdly oversized battle axe of Borcourt, son of Botox. This dwarf weapon is a two-handed axe of immense size to the point of being inconvenient. It can only be effectively used at all by someone who has a strength of 16 or higher, and if they have less than 18 strength, they will only be able to use it with a 1-step reduction in the action dice rolled to hit, so a d20 attack roll would be reduced to a d16 attack roll. It will also reduce the wielder's initiative die by 2 steps. The axe does 1d10 base damage and has a +1 bonus to hit and to damage. However, in the hands of a worthy dwarf warrior, it will be usable for mighty deeds of arms to shatter any non-magical objects of glass, crystal, wood, metal, or stone. In the case of any large object, a wall, for example, or a robot, such mighty blows will do 4d10 +4 damage, plus the wielder's strength bonus. It will even be able to break magical objects of the above materials if the roll on the deed die was a 6 or higher, always meaning truly good odds of avoiding discovery, as the dagger itself is not that bright. DCC. The lore blade created by the human wizard Felion at the time that Arcombe was ruled by the Techno-Minotaur. The lore blade is said to be the most intelligent blade very forged. It is lawful and has an intelligence of 18, and is capable of speech and telepathy. It functions as a +1 long sword, but also has the quality of precision strikes, granting it an addition +3 to hit against any armored opponent. It also grants +2 to the wielder's armor class. On a critical hit, the lore blade will also do 1d6 extra damage against an opponent in addition to any other result. The lore blade can detect invisible creatures within 50, detect gold within 30, detect sloping passages to 100, read and understand most common languages, only the most obscure, would likely to be unfamiliar to the blade, understand most maps at will, and is familiar with a great deal of knowledge of ancient history as well as lore about races and magical items. The sword has a +6 bonus on a d20 roll to know any piece of lore on any of those matters, and any others that the GM feels appropriate, but it should be noted that all of its information is now at least 500 years out of date, and it will know nothing about any recent events or developments from the past 5 centuries that it has been languishing in the petrified husk of a great worm. The lore blade will generally operate only with someone of lawful alignment, refusing to use any of its powers for neutral or chaotic beings, for whom the sword will only act as an ordinary +1 long sword. And as it considers itself smarter than just about anyone who ever wields it, will have no compunctions about trying to manipulate or mentally control its wielder to do what the lore blade thinks is best. The Loreblade's agenda will always be to attempt to rebuild civilization and create an enlightened society of lawful benign despots under the sword's direction. Of course, that will establish peace and prosperity through power and spread its civilizing influence to the whole of the world, finally ending the long dark age. Title: DCC Campaign Log, Eat, Pray, Save 5S. Dragon Breath Date: November 14th, 2014. In this week's adventure, the PCs found that dwarves have a very serious obsession with entering cave complexes from the back entrance. That apparently there's a novel based on an encounter with Tiamat entitled Eat, Pray, Save versus Dragon Breath. That the lair of the most powerful dragon in the world also features what is quite possibly the largest pile of dragon dung in the world. That dwarves are not particularly good at sneaking around in deep caverns. That any possibility of entering a cave complex without alerting its inhabitants goes out the window when you have a baker's dozen of dwarf warriors who insist on bickering at full volume. That any remaining scrap of possibility of being undetected by every denizen in the greater cave complex area will go entirely out the window once the dwarves deploy their rocket launcher. That not all superintelligent fungus creatures are hostile. That non-hostile superintelligent fungus creatures do, however, speak with the silliest speech impediment ever. That the egg beyond has not only broken through the Ancient One's barrier seal containing the last remnant of the universe, but that it has also brought cosplayers with it. That sometimes it's harder to communicate with extra-universal catgirl cosplayers than with superintelligent fungus creatures. That superintelligent fungus creatures are psychic, and thus make excellent translators. That extra-universal catgirl cosplayers are ridiculously annoying. That if you're clever, you can sometimes avoid having to fight primitive troglodytes. That even if you're clever, you can't always avoid having to slaughter a horde of Tiamat cultists and their dragonmen allies. But if you're clever in how you go about it, it can be a lot easier than it looks, especially if you have dwarven magnetic grenades. That Tiamat is obviously very badly damaged by her encounter with the egg beyond. That nevertheless, it might be a challenge to kill Tiamat when she is surrounded by a small army of cultists, dragonmen, wizards, and troglodyte shamans. That magically sacrificing an extra-universal catgirl cosplayer will win you points with Sezrican. That, on the other hand, not letting your allies know what you're doing is likely to cause a panic. That will ruin the element of surprise, or any chance of avoiding a fight with Tiamat's small army. That ending on a cliffhanger will leave your players on the edge of their seats for the next session. Title: DCC Campaign Update. They are the Eggmen, Gugu Ga Jube. Date: November 27th, 2014. When last we'd left our intrepid heroes, they had been discovered by the mighty though mortally wounded Tiamat, Lord Lady of Dragons, and by about 30 mutant fanatics, a number of dragonmen, a troglodyte, chieftain and his honor guard and shaman, and the sorceress of Tiamat. Combat was about to happen. As it turns out, it did ensue. By the end of it, half the PC party, half of the cosplay catgirls from another universe, 11 out of 12 crusading dwarves, and Tiamat and most of her army were all dead. As it turns out, a breath weapon from a 95% dead super dragon is still enough to immolate a sizable chunk of your party. As it turns out, dragonmen hatched by a dying dragon daemon are kind of derpy. As it turns out, the troglodyte waving his greatsword around with panache before facing the heroic PC in single combat was not the setup for an Indiana Jones down-in-one-shot gag. Instead, it was the PC who went down like a bitch. As it turns out, you don't get to be troglodyte chief through good looks or charm. As it turns out, cosplay catgirls can hold their own in a fight once they do their super kawaii transformation sequence and pull out their Harajuku Go-Go Protectora balls. As it turns out, firing a missile launcher at a well-supported cave roof will do nothing to save your cause. As it turns out, casting a massive cloud kill will. As it turns out, Tiamat really did have a massive shitload of treasure. So massive the party had to have Bill the Elf ask Sezrican to teleport it out for them. As it turns out, Sez was so elated from the death of his rival that he really didn't mind, and sent it out to somewhere called Ice Dome Zero, which is supposed to be abandoned. The party immediately decided that it should be their new home base. As it turns out, there were tons of magic items too. As it turns out, the party's other elf, Rick Ricandra, got the bulk of those items. He also unfortunately got the bulk of the cursed items, including the plate mail of suckitude, which sucks, and the asshole ring, which makes you act like an asshole. It also makes you totally reflect any magic specifically cast at you, which Rick thought was awesome, but only because he hasn't yet figured out the implications of what that will mean for him. As it turns out, Rick Ricandra was the second player to get a 1% chance of a significantly useful combat spell having a gender-changing side effect. As it turns out, no one believes him any longer when he says he joined the Azure Order as a scam. Not after joining the Azure Order of non-cisgendered wizards, then taking the Lord of all flesh as his patron, carrying around a bra of gender change, and getting a spell that changes his gender. As the Lord of all flesh himself said, that's not accident, that's a pattern of denial. As it turns out, the Lord of all flesh is way too happy to get offered the corpse of a dead dragon deity, and has a fairly discomforting idea of a reward for service. As it turns out, the party still had to go destroy the egg beyond before it destroyed the known universe. As it turns out, after trekking halfway through a massive cave complex, they found out the egg was on an island in a deadly transuniversal, vine-infested lake, and had to trek back to portage some canoes from the mutant cultist village they'd devastated earlier. As it turns out, the egg beyond is the size of a 5-story building. As it turns out, after getting some help in translation from Fun Guy the Fungi, not his real name, but the party calls him that on account of his being a friendly, giant fungus monster, the party finds out that the cosplay cat girls from another universe who had come into this universe with the egg know a secret entrance. As it turns out, the first floor lobby of the egg beyond is full of Eggmen Guardians. Goo Goo Gajoob. As it turns out, being able to cast a spell giving you 50 animated armor defenders is only of limited utility when the Eggmen can seemingly multiply indefinitely. As it turns out, while a massive cloud kill is super useful against a daemon, Dragon Lord, and its horde of cultists, it's totally useless against Eggmen. As it turns out, the doors to the egg beyond's internal sphincter turbolifts are extremely resistant to dwarven axes. Not so resistant, however, to monofilament whips. As it turns out, the treasure of an egg from the outer void beyond the universe will be a gem of a color that no one ever saw before. As it turns out, the sphincter turbolift led the party to where the egg was imprisoning Marduk, the crystalline dragon who may be Tiamat's heir. And Marduk is pissed off. Fortunately, Marduk thinks it was the egg who killed Tiamat, not the PCs. For now. As it turns out, the heart of the egg beyond is an egg within an egg. Goo Goo Gajoob. As it turns out, with Marduk's help and figuring out its weak spot, the PCs were able to defeat it. As it turns out, defeating the egg beyond generates a miniature black hole that will suck everything there out into the void beyond. As it turns out, the PCs managed to planewalk away to their new home in Ice Dome 0, just in time. As for Marduk, he astrally shifted away just in time too. And boy is he going to be pissed when the troglodyte chief, who survived the massacre at Tiamat's cave, tells him that the PCs were the ones who killed his mom-dad, and that Sezerican sent them and then killed his brother and any other potential heirs to Tiamat's power. That sounds like the start of an epic dragon revenge story. But that'll be a story for another time, like at the worst possible moment for the PCs. Next time, Terror at Ice Dome 0. Title: DCC Campaign Update. Inhuman Freudian Terror at Ice Dome 0. Date: December 11th, 2014. In this weekend's adventure, the party confronted the realization that even protected by a dome, they were somewhere really fucking cold. That the central power sphere of the dome was apparently missing. That their cleric was too, after the previous night's patron-induced orgy. That what happens in X stays in X has become the motto of the party. That there were traces of suspicious slime in the dome. That no slime is ever a good slime. That the totally abandoned dome might not be as totally abandoned as Sezerican made it out to be. That the outside of the dome might be populated by abominable snowmen or Yeti-eye or Sasquatches, or some damn thing. Almost immediately thereafter, that the Sasquatchi, are inside the dome. That the dwarf felled son of Feldstein, may have been kidnapped by Yetises, possibly slimy Yetises. That for some damn reason pluralizing tundra, monsters is tough. That in spite of being frozen, powerless, and an apparently Sasquatch-filled death trap, Ice Dome Zero is not without its charms. Charms like laser pistols, blaster pistols, laser rifles, blaster rifles, and 24 cobalt limpet mines. Also parkas. The sudden epiphany that their mysterious enemies might not be abominable snowmen at all, but just guys in primitive parkas, albeit slimy parkas. That the best plan they have is to seal the door and cast sequester. That the above plan may have been for naught, as Feld is back and acting really weird. That Feld wants them to come with him to what is clearly some kind of obvious trap. That she is waiting for them, and really loves them, and just wants to care for them. That she, as it turns out, is in fact a giant slug, creature called the Gorlax, that exudes addictive love, slime out of its spike, nipples. That discovering this turn of events in the middle of seeing a bunch of the Gorlax's cold, mutant love slaves feeding was not the most appetizing way of discovering the truth. But at least it turns out that there were no Sasquatches after all. That unfortunately, what is there, in the volcanic cave under Ice Dome Zero, is a giant, emotionally needy love-smothering slug monster, about 20 cold mutants, a dozen little, still giant slugs, and one recent dwarf convert. That fighting the Gorlax and her forces from a safe distance doesn't protect you when the narcotic effect of her freshly exuded panic slime is transmissible by scent. That once you've suckled love slime from one of the Gorlax's spike nipples, you start to question whether there isn't good slime after all. That when everyone else in the party is suddenly experiencing a weird codependent girlfriend-mother Freudian love thing with a giant slug, it's time for Bill the Elf to run like hell and consider blowing the entire dome to shit just to save his own ass. That in the middle of all these Freudian connotations, casting charm person on a dwarf under the Gorlax's slime-induced, in a relationship, status only generate an even worse child of divorce-type emotionally paralyzing conflict. That when you're trying to avoid being affected by airborne slime pheromones, you're willing to go to desperate measures, including taping a plastic bag full of water over your head. That air filter masks from the dome's lab is probably an easier solution. That the Gorlax really isn't evil, she just wants to love all men, and for all men to love her in a dependent and emotionally supportive way and to listen to her interesting conversation. That actually she also does have a plan to reproduce hundreds more little Gorlaxes and take over the world. But she's doing it because of the love. That any possibility of finding an easy way out of this, potentially involving lava, evaporates when it becomes clear that the reason why this particular giant slug monster is so large and so powerful is that at some point she ate the dome's power sphere. That when all other options fail, the only solution left is apparently to create a distraction to get some of the Gorlax's slime-tripping boyfriends out of the way and shoot the living fuck out of her. That in the end, the Gorlax's death only leaves anyone who's tasted her sweet, sweet slime milk feeling despondent and depressed in the knowledge that never again will they feel a love as pure and tender as when they were suckling on the spike nipple of a giant slug monster. That after everything seems resolved and the power sphere is recovered, there is still a dozen little slug monsters crawling around the dome to deal with. That to top it all off, even with the power sphere, the dome systems don't actually work. That when nothing else could go wrong, Feld's son of Feldstein comes back with 100 cold mutant warriors at his back. That the cold mutants had always known Ice Dome Zero as the forbidden place and dreaded the monsters that would come to steal some of their men from the tribe. But when Feld actually explained to them that the Gorlax would give them warmth and food, suddenly it was paradise to them. That the discovery that the elves, who had kept them out in the cold even before the monsters, have now killed the creature that could have been feeding and warming them all this time, is enough to drive the cold mutants into a murderous elf to killing rage. That promising the cold mutants freedom only generates the response they want to give us freedom. Kill them. That everything gets smoothed over by a very dwarvish coup, when Komos the dwarf and Feld the dwarf conspire to have the cold mutants move into the dome with them, and to even spare the elves as long as the elves will now be the dome's slaves. that apparently Bill the elf is not pleased with his dreams of finally having an elven dome as his own personal fortress of solitude is dashed when he's going to be a slave, even if just a pretend one to placate the cold mutants, and instead Komos the dwarf gets to be the dome's decider. Title: DCC Campaign Archive, Kill It With Fire. Date: December 26, 2014. In today's adventure, the PCs learned that you can't really take a year off if your ice dome has no power. Even once the power is back on, you can't really take a year off if the dome has no food. Elven domes have a very sophisticated food maker technology that in essence means elves spend most of their lives eating their own shit. Apparently that's okay because elves poop rainbows, at least according to the party's resident elves. You can use mending to fix a processor unit, but you can't use it to just manifest the vital radioactive isotope that makes the unit process. Ultimately, you just can't take a year off. When trying to find a rare radioactive isotope, the first place the party can think of checking is the Tower of the Azure Order. As usual, whenever you visit the Azure Order, there's a crisis of epic proportions going on, and they want to send you on a suicide quest. In this case, this quest involves assisting a succubus and a band of dwarves to rescue an Azure wizard from the Dark Ones whose brain-eater servants have kidnapped and taken to one of the outer modules of the fallen ancient dwarven machine holds. The urgency is because when the sky rocks are aligned, the sacrifice of this particular young wizard will allow the Dark Ones to at long last extinguish the last sun. Dwarves come in packs of 12. This particular band is led by Prince Snort, son of Schwartz, who, like all dwarf bands ever, have as their goal to reclaim their lost homeland. The Azure Order does not usually team up with a blonde bombshell succubus named Hot Gams, but stopping the last sun from being put out makes for strange bedfellows. Hot Gams will give you the time of your life. Unfortunately, it will also be the last time of your life, or as the tribal mutants like to put it, death by snoo. You have to go through all kinds of bullshit just to get to the dwarven machine hold. For starters, you have to go to a place called the Forest of Worms, which is not named after some German village. No, as expected, it's called that because it's a forest full of giant worms. When you get past the worm caves, then you have to go through the Cave of Webs. You'd expect the Cave of Webs to be filled with giant spiders, but it isn't. Unfortunately, that's because it's only full of one really giant spider that ate all the other spiders. The dwarven response to a giant spider is kill it with fire. When choosing whether to go down through the Cave of Plague Beasts or near the City of the Pale Elves, the latter sounds more palatable. Apparently, the Pale Elves are a race of evil chaos, worshipping underground. Elves with incredibly pale skin and a seriously misogynistic culture. Pale elves use dart guns with a toxic ooze even medi. Bots can't heal. The dwarven response to pale elf guards is kill them with fire. Pale elves can end up being a problem that solves itself if a pale elf wizard summons a terrible giant ice frog and then dies the very next round, leaving the frog to run amok amongst the remaining elves. When faced with a poison ooze a Medibot can't heal, it's time to call on the Lord of all flesh. If you have a dying team, mate the Lord of all flesh will lie to you about what you need to do to draw out the poison for comedic, erotic effect. People with a lot of secrets should probably be careful to know that succubi read minds. They should be particularly careful if they had specifically put on bras of femininity, for no other reason than to avoid being seduced and killed by a succubus. If there's one thing a succubus can't stand, it's female impersonators who act like bimbos. The dwarven machine hold is a sophisticated labyrinthine complex of rooms, corridors, and great halls, none of which the ancient dwarves ever bothered to make a map about because they all knew where everything was anyways and would almost never get visitors. There are two things you need to know about brain eaters. The first is that they eat brains. The second is that the dwarven response to them is kill it with fire. In fact, the dwarven response to just about any kind of hostile entity, small or large, is to loudly declare that said entity must be killed, ideally with fire. You actually also need to know one more thing about brain eaters. They have a massive psychic blast attack that will routinely kill half the party every time it's used. The absurdity of there being any chance of a group of 12 dwarves managing to take back a lost dwarven homeland after 10 millennia of occupation by Lovecraftian monstrosities only becomes slightly more absurd when there are but 6 dwarves left. If by scrying and divination, the team Succubus finds out that the Dark Ones are to the south and east of here, everyone agrees the best plan of action is to go west and north. A second encounter with a Brain Eater will still kill half your party, even if you only had half a party left. One way to avoid potential blackmail scenarios from psychic succubi is if said succubi get their brain eaten in legitimate combat for the purpose of world-saving and dwarven repatriation. At this point, even Prince Snort's 2 remaining dwarven subjects think it seems pretty unlikely that they'll be able to liberate a vast dwarf hold from the Brain Eaters and Dark Ones who presently infest it. That doesn't stop his determination to do it or die trying. Almost certainly the latter. The Brain Eaters apparently have no need of the old and Spartan dwarf living quarters, so they've allowed it to be overrun by insect men. Insect men are, fortunately, a lot easier to kill than Brain Eaters, so the party decides that this is a good place to hold up. With only 6 out of 16 members left alive, RPG Pundit. Eaters apparently have no need of the old and Spartan dwarf living quarters, so they've allowed it to be overrun by insect men. Insect men are, fortunately, a lot easier to kill than Brain Eaters, so the party decides that this is a good place to hold up. With only 6 out of 16 members left alive, RPG Pundit.